Well, Heinrich was the first who to make it. Yeah, in 1928, I think. First version, or 29, the first drawn version.
So in 1928, Heinrich made the first raw version of the pyramid. How did that come to be? Can you share a little bit?
Yeah, it was an accident.
The pyramid itself was an accident?
It was a accidental discovery. He was actually studying the costs, the indirect costs of accidents, which is the first subject Heinrich became famous with back in the days. And you've probably heard the 1-to-4 ratio, which was the average he landed upon after reviewing, I don't know, 10,000 cases or so. And while they were studying those cases, they made the discovery, hey, look, we've had these kind of issues before, but they didn't result in serious injury. And so they started digging into that and studied various scenarios. And then as you correctly say, that they averaged and ended up on a very, very neat number, which is very memorable, the 129, 300, because there's the 30 and then 300. And yeah, it's one of the most discussed and debated concepts in safety, and also probably the most misunderstood. Heinrich never intended it to be a metric, for example, which some people think it is. You have to count, and then you can predict that if you are closing it now, there's going to be a bang. There's nothing like that. It's what he says, and it's quite literally. He said, realizing that they're often, or nearly always, I think he says, most of the time, there's something minor happening before things really go wrong. If you realize that there is an opportunity, and he uses that word in connection, and I think that's just beautiful. It's very proactive, and I think he was the first to put it that way in writing, and made the idea of, well, look ahead, be proactive. He made it popular, that kind of thinking. So he basically said you don't have to wait till somebody gets injured in order to improve safety. And then that's brilliant. And then well, in the decades that came after, well, people twisted the idea or interpreted their way, or is a shame, because I think the thought is brilliant, and only the fact that we're still talking about it almost 100 years down the road says something about his qualities as a communicator, to come up with a picture and some numbers, and the numbers don't have to be correct, because it's an average applied to some cases at the time. And
right
but it's so memorable. You never forget the sequence 129, 300, and he's really smart also. If it's by intent or just by coincidence, he repeats the numbers constantly, so people really get a hammer it home message. It's and for good and the worse.
Well, welcome to the podcast, Carsten.
Yeah.
We're at the welcome audience who are listening in. This is the Safeopedia podcast, and today we have Carsten with us. And if you're not familiar with Carsten Busch, he is the owner of Mind the Risk. So welcome to the podcast, Carsten.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're pleased that you're here. We have dived into a great conversation. We're talking about Heinrich's well-known triangle. And I want to get a little bit deeper on that, because there was a few things that you said that I think were the real learning nugget that people are overlooking when they're just focusing on the physical triangle and remembering those numbers. And it was when you were saying, be proactive and look ahead. That what Heinrich was actually trying to share out, and you're right, it's 100 years later, and we're still talking about it. So there's something to the core of that, is that typically there's been other things that have happened before that are clear indicator that something major could potentially occur. And so as health and safety professionals, we always go back to our core purpose is to eliminate and mitigate, right?
Yeah, he talks about the risk basically without using the word, because he was an insurance guy and risk had a very special meaning for him. A risk was the company he was serving, but he talks about accident potential. Yeah, he definitely does. Before Heinrich, there was Louis de Blois, the vice president safety in DuPont, who wrote a really good book that was very influential at the time, I think. After that, people like Haddon and a million other smart safety guys came in. That they did more or less the same with different word, but the realization that if you don't do something about this, somebody will get hurt at some point in time. That's proactivity.
Mhm.
Guarding machines was a proactive act, but without a proper theory. The theory was, well, there's a hazard there. We have to shield people, and it would take until the 50s or 60s that Gibson and Haddon came up with the energy barrier model. But I
Mhm.
think the thought realization, there's energy, and if you get too close, how, that has been there all along, probably since the dawn of time.
Mhm. And do you think that as health and safety professionals, we could be doing more in order to mitigate the risks in the workplace? What are your thoughts about some recommendations about how people can be looking at newer ways of mitigating risks?
I think we're pretty good at managing the more obvious and the visible risks. One thing I think that's been, well, emerging since the 70s, 80s, maybe, and even more now in later years, is the realization that a risk can go very, very slowly, creep upon you, and then suddenly it goes boom. Because of very small steps, and that's, well, what some of my favorite authors and theories there are discussing those small steps, like risks building up over time and everybody ignoring them, and the people who are not ignoring them are being ignored, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
And then things go badly wrong, and then everybody says, "Oh shit, sorry, oh oops, we should have seen this coming."
Right. Right.
Or we could have seen this coming, but we were too busy fixing other problems or whatever. And one of my really favorite authors, Barry Turner, wrote this really groundbreaking book, Man-Made Disaster, in '78,
Mhm.
which is 50 years ago almost, where he discusses a couple of cases and then builds his theory on those. And one of the most famous cases is the Aberfan Tip Disaster. You've probably heard about it, or
Mhm.
maybe you've even seen an episode of, what's the show, the Queen,
Yep.
which
Yep.
spends an entire episode. I've heard, I've not seen it.
Yeah, it does.
Where
Yeah.
this mine and then the waste tip well, comes
The
down the
slide.
hill and
Yeah.
the slides down the hill, and the school is buried, and
Yeah.
120 kids or something. died tragically. That's a very visible risk up there, but people didn't think of it as much as a risk at the time, because the inspector, the regulator, people running the mine were thinking the mine risks, they're not above ground, they're down several hundred meters in mine, where people suffocate and explosions and all that. And well, that's just a bunch of rocks lying there, till the bunch of rocks started sliding because there was a lot of rain and was tipped on this former little river or what it was, and it was quite a lot of rocks, so it was unstable, and that's, I think, we were going to deal much more with those slowly building risks, or risks that are totally invisible, but we are so connected these days that something that happens, well, we had a recent case, something happens in China, and we're all having problems with it.
Well, and I guess that's where, I was wondering, like I said to you before, like, why is it taking us so long to become aware of these, like, to be proactive? And I guess I have a different interpretation, because, to be quite upfront with you, I didn't, as a frontline worker in safety, I didn't see things as being proactive on site. So is it possible, Carsten, that just to, like, the inspectors were looking in this one area about the risks of the mine, right, and didn't see the landslide potential happening, that there is these different perceptions from those who are inspecting and those who are on the ground?
Yeah, that
Right?
definitely. I've done inspections, and I've done investigations, and people said, "Well, we've been saying this for years."
Yeah. Okay.
So being proactive or reactive, or perceiving risk, it's in the eyes of the beholder.
Right.
It's a matter of perspective, and of course, in my daytime job, I work with people, and they often, quite often, say to me, "Well, you people at the head office, you don't understand how the world is down here." And I say,
Yes.
You're absolutely right."
Okay.
And our director, she doesn't know how well. She has a feeling how it may be out on the street, but she doesn't know. She is actually living in a different world, where she struggles with the government and with priorities and with regulations and all that. And that's not what you're dealing with. You're
Right.
actually you are really living in different worlds, but we must try to connect these worlds as good as we can. And of course, a director does have different issues than a frontliner.
Yeah.
But
And that's where communication
Yeah.
and really building that rapport and engagement comes in to your risk management, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it is, and I don't have the case entirely in my head, but even in Aberfan, there were complaints about the tip. So there were people who had seen the risk potential, but they were just ignored because there were other bigger problems. And that's also often the case in accidents that happen, that, well, we were too busy managing other stuff that seemed to be more pressing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really hard, I think, because after the fact, it's easy to say, yeah, well, this was more important. But as long as nothing happens, the tip isn't more important, because I don't know what other problems they were having.
What lessons learned could you share with people, some recommendations to help kind of be proactive also in those other areas that might be our blind spots because we
Yeah, well,
aren't in the
one
site all the time.
yeah, one thing I think that is really crucial, and it's not a foolproof and perfect solution,
Yeah.
but it's to involve the people who are actually doing the real work in messy circumstances, who know how messy the world is and that it doesn't follow the procedures we have, but can say, yeah, sure, that's right most of the time, but we don't always work with two people at a spot. Sometimes machinery doesn't work. Sometimes we have to, and so on. That you get those kinds of input and take the critical questions and maybe the annoying comments or the criticism, take that serious, because often there's something in there. And of course, there is a limit to how far you can go and how long you can discuss, and you cannot involve everybody. And safety isn't always democratic, but do your best to get opposing voices, and well, because they can teach you something. Sorry, you can learn something from them.
And we can now, in modern technology, we have a lot of modern technology that could help people collect that data. And then couldn't you see patterns and trends across different sites that maybe if there's
Uh,
a potential similar problem?
Perhaps yes, but it all depends on the data and where it comes from. Because if it's reported data, you have to take it with some pinches of salt.
Mm-hmm.
There's certainly something in the data, but you can't go blindly on the numbers, for example, because well, it's to the people's discretion to report it and what they report, and there's also the question, how do they phrase it?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of these reports go through several translation phases where, well, how is it phrased the first time and how is it picked up by somebody in the control room, and how does it end up in the report, and how is it understood by the analyst? It's tricky
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because language is a wonderful thing, but it's also very ambiguous. So yes, there are ways to help us with data and so on, but
So what would your top recommendations be to those who are listening to kind of sort through data then in a more effective way?
I think you always should take a reality check on data. I think data can be a great starting point,
Mm-hmm.
and we're speaking very general now. So I have to be very careful
Yep.
how I say this.
Yeah, this
But
is a general.
say,
Yeah.
yeah, you have some data, and the data will perhaps make you wonder, why is this so? The data in itself isn't the answer. I think that's a good a way of starting. Don't ever regard the data as an answer, but as a start of a question and a start of a dialogue with people. Because if you have this, this looks weird. Why is there a peak, or maybe why isn't there a peak, which we could perhaps expect at this point in time, and then speak with the people who are knowledgeable about the process, and well, ask them, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
And then keep asking, because maybe they don't recognize or they're too busy, but try to get something about what you see and why it makes sense to them, or why it doesn't make sense, and or what I could say. So what
I
I
like,
want to
yeah.
say is make sure that whatever you do, you have a blend of numbers with stories, and yeah.
I like that. I like what you're saying, that the data is not the answer. So just because you get a report of something, that's not the answer. That's actually your starting point of asking questions, opening up dialogue. Oh, I'm seeing this here. Why is that happening? What is going on? How did that happen? Start asking your W's.
Yeah.
Am I on to the right track here, or?
Yeah, that's exactly. And then again, ask also for dissenting voices. We had an interesting case in our organization, my organization, where I work daytime, where one of the top managers, she was concerned about the number of injuries due to a certain activity that we were having, and it was quite a high number a few years ago before COVID. Because after COVID, all the numbers are messed up, of course. But before COVID, we really had a peak there, which was, whoa, how did that happen? But then we looked back a couple of years, and I started making, say, a process chart where you have, well, the median and then some standard deviations. And we discussed it again, and I said, well, I think that the peak last year is very interesting, but what worries me maybe more are the two peaks downwards, the 2 years before, because why did we have so few reports those years? That tells me that there was something really wrong then, probably with the reporting or whatever. So as I say, well, the numbers are good to start a discussion, and the numbers should also be challenged, also be placed in a bigger picture, because there will probably be a lot of random fluctuations, and try to figure out whether it's randomness that's doing its thing,
Yep.
or complexity doing its thing, or that it's well, within the expected range, or maybe it's below the expected range, and that should raise questions also. Did we really do well at that point in time, or did we just not report?
So ask questions.
Why is that? Yeah, ask questions, and
Starting
don't
point.
take for granted. Well, this was a bad year. Maybe it was an excellent year because people suddenly saw the light, so to say, and started reporting because they realized, well, it actually helps if we report. We make things visible. Our director takes things more seriously. Well, and so on.
Interesting. Yep. No, I like that. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying about the with Heinrich's. You mentioned before, it never meant to be a metric, right? About the triangle. What was it supposed to be about?
I think the numbers that he used are just a matter of, first of all, teaching people, because, well, the numbers speak, and they give a sense of expertise and precision, and well, it looks scientific. He called the book Scientific Approach. It wasn't a science book at all. But well, he tried to approach safety fact-based, and, well, a bit with numbers, not too much, but the numbers he is known for. So it's kind of a communication tool, and it's also a tool of persuasion, because I tend often to compare it to the guy on the television commercials, at least formerly, selling a toothpaste and washing detergents and so on. They always had a white coat on, and they looked like serious science people. because that's, well, one way of selling stuff. So I think he packed it in a sciencey way, and it sold
in
pretty
that way.
well.
But
He got his message across to managers, and that's what mattered to him.
but you were saying he was still saying to people, like, be proactive and look ahead, and I guess also like look for that story in what is the number saying, and then question that,
Yeah,
open that up.
yeah. The problem is with these numbers, that they became a legend, so to speak.
Right.
And people only remembered the numbers. People didn't remember the stories he told, because he gives in his book and in his papers many examples where he says this happened, these circumstances, and in this case we had a 1 to 3,000. He has an example where there is an employee crossing rail tracks daily, and then after 3 years he gets hit by a train or something.
Yeah.
And is seriously injured, and he says, well, this was a 1 to 3,000 event. And then he has other events that are, well, 1 to 25 or something. And all those stories tell us two things. He averaged and landed on a very neat number that was easy to remember and easy to communicate, which is good for bringing his message across. The important thing is, which is often forgotten, the 129, 300 is an absolute number. It's an average, and you have to look into specific scenarios where you can see a potential of being proactive.
Right.
And well, a lot of people say, well, the triangle can't work because when you prevent slips, trips, and falls, you won't prevent an explosion, and that's true. And it's also what Heinrich said, not with these words, but Heinrich says, here's this example, here's that example, here's another example, and then I average it. So,
but you're looking at similar examples. Like, so if you're talking about slips, just slips, you can't put falls in it. You're just looking at slips.
Yeah.
Right. So with the number of how many times does somebody slip on a certain surface, say a slick surface in the retail store, right? That is wearing heels, because that happened a lot, right? You could see that sometimes somebody might slip but catch themselves. That's still a slip. And that might have happened 100 times compared to the individual who slipped and twisted their ankle. Isn't that what he's saying, is compare apples to apples, not apples to oranges?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what he's saying. So actually he had like 1 million different triangles, and then averaged them into one to communicate the message. But you have to look at those mini triangles, at the slip in a store, and then there's a fire hazard in the store, and well.
And then the solution would be, well, if there is a whole bunch of near miss type of slips on the same surface, then maybe it's the surface that needs to be upgraded to be a non-slip when it gets wet. Right?
That was also his preferred solution. If you have a problem, try to engineer the environment.
And that's going to that proactive. Look ahead, be proactive. So you know from this happening so many times that the likelihood of something severe happening is coming down.
Perhaps. The problem is you never know how high the frequency would be. So you only know that for highly technical stuff like light bulbs. You know, if you do the switch 1,000 times, he will probably say boom at the end. But well, slipping, you don't know the frequency. But only seeing, oh, this could have been worse. You see something slip and then catch themselves, or maybe twist their ankle. You can still realize, well, but there are sharp objects here, or there is a staircase where this person could have fallen down. So I can do something. And of course, you have to see it in the light of
Yeah.
many other stuff. So, and that's another point that's often made. Well, we're really good in managing the small potential stuff, but we also have to realize that there is this triangle for really big stuff, but we're
Yeah.
not as good maybe catching the small stuff that and I don't want to say the word predict, but signals here is
Yeah.
something big
Yeah.
that could happen. And the thing is, often we have to look outside of what is typically seen as safety then,
Yeah.
because you probably have to go into your maintenance system, which says something about the machinery, or about, well, if we talk about Deepwater Horizon, for example, they were very good at managing the small stuff, occupational hazards, but they certainly had weak signals about the process safety.
Yeah.
They just didn't take them as serious as the other stuff, so that they were really good managing one kind of safety and not the other kind of safety. And then, well, we know what happened.
Yeah. And I like what you're saying about the signals. And I also think that pairs very well about, engaging that frontline team who often may see the signals and giving them an easy way to maybe share back. If you say to them, hey, you know what, for the next month, I'm doing a campaign on figuring out slips on the floors here. So if you see something, can you send in a mini report, right, for the next month? A lot of times the teams where I worked with, they would say, you know what, if we had a way to just report that the slicer guard was coming a little loose and needs to be fixed, I would do that. I was talking to one guy about using QR codes, where you could use an app on your phone and just anonymously say, yep, this is coming loose now, and send it in. Do you think leveraging stuff like that could be helpful for us to get that kind of data?
Yes, I think it's helpful to get data on certain topics.
Mm-hmm.
Other topics are probably not as easy to catch. And then, of course, it depends very much on the industry and location and all that. But some things are just easier to report for people than others, because it's probably very unproblematic to report small time defects, or maybe not wearing PPE. But
And that's kind of cultural too, though, isn't it, Carson?
yeah. And but it's maybe not as easy to speak about conflicting goals, or competence issues, and that kind of stuff. And that's harder, and it's also much more difficult, I think, to put it on paper or on a system, a reporting system, because, well, we have conflicting goals all the time, and which one are we going to report, and which one are serious, and how does it reflect on us, because we're professionals, and we need to we are seen to be competent to be dealing with conflicting goals and fix problems. And there are a lot of managers who go for the slogan, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. I've only recently started realizing that actually is a quite toxic phrase, because it's a way of silencing people.
Yes. Yeah, it is.
Don't bring me problems. Only bring me good news that you fixed something. So if your boss is saying that to you, it's quite hard to say, but sorry, I don't have a solution for this because this is on your level, or
Yeah.
maybe it's
Yeah.
three levels up in the corner office. But we are having a problem because we can't do all this stuff in the time we are having.
And I'm glad that you brought this up because that's another piece of it that's not discussed is, we have adults that are working with us in the workplace. We're all adults. And there seems to be sometimes this kind of parent-child mentality of a relationship with between those who are on-site workers and those who are doing more supervisor or management positions. And exactly what you're saying, phrases like bring me solutions, not problems. Don't just come crying to me about things. That diffuses our ability to have people reporting.
Yeah, totally. And I think many people don't even realize what they are doing, and that they're actually silencing. Well, that they are busy, they're making their own, and then that's very legitimate. I think
Yeah.
that they're trying to manage their own work pressure by, well, I don't have time to listen to all the whining people here, so just only bring me important stuff. But if you don't listen to the small stuff, why would you listen to the important stuff? And by the
Yeah.
way, who says what's important? Because, well, is it the mine or is it the tip?
Yeah. And
So that's really that's a hard issue, and as you say, that's a cultural issue also.
And I mean, it's gonna be a conversation for another time because we're breaking open another conversation about culture, the values and beliefs that we reinforce into the workplace. That what do we value hearing and following up on, and I think that's one that's gonna be another discussion for an hour or so. But before we go, because I know we are closing on our time, I wanted to ask you about the EHS Congress because you are gonna be speaking there. It's happening September the 13th to the 14th. So
Yes.
what will you be talking about there, Carsten?
Well, two things. I've been invited to be on a panel where
Mhm.
we are going to discuss, among other things, the gap that there is between theory and practice in safety, or let me say, between the academic knowledge and what's used in practice, which I think can be a very interesting discussion because, well, there is, I think these two are also living in somewhat different worlds sometimes for a variety of reasons. And, well, I think we should try to bridge those worlds so that what the good that is developed in academia is brought to practice and made usable and helps people to improve safety and, well, improve our everyday lives. And at the same time, that what is happening in practice is brought to academia, so that academia can actually, well, study this and try to improve whatever is happening, and also is relevant. I'm a big fan of just doing science for the sake of science, but at some point it should be more than just academics having a good time among themselves, if you get what I mean. So that's
Absolutely.
yeah.
It's got
So
to move
that's
the needle, right?
yeah, yeah. So that's
So,
one of the subjects we're going to do in a panel discussion on the 13th,
mhm.
early in the morning, I think. And then I've been invited to do a workshop in the afternoon, which I think is going to be great fun
Mhm.
because I will be doing it on the subject of is safety a choice? Or safety is a choice is a slogan that's often heard. and I'm going to decompose that slogan and look into the underlying assumptions that may be there, and discuss them critically, and then, well, maybe with the group end up on some kind of a conclusion whether safety is a choice or maybe not as much as we think, or maybe that it's a choice but perhaps not of the one we're talking to. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun. It
Yeah.
is going to be a lot of fun for me, but I'm not sure about the audience. But I
It
hope
sounds
that
like
it will.
fun.
Yeah, I think it will be. And well, in the audience there will be very knowledgeable people, so I'm probably going to learn a lot from them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Carsten. This has been really great. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure talking to you. So
Thank you. And so everybody, you can see more about the EH&S Congress that's happening September the 13th to the 14th in Berlin. I have put the link in this episode below. And if you're interested in finding more great content, to come and visit us at safeopedia.com. And if you enjoyed our discussion today with Carsten, please put a like on down in the control panel there on YouTube. And if you'd like to be alerted about the next great conversation that we have coming, hit that subscribe button. Until next time, stay safe.